Hi, this is Guru in Tech Support, and today we're going to be looking at Apple Pay and Google Wallet, and why one works and why one doesn't in various locations. This is going to be a pretty technical explanation. It's going to go through a lot of how NFC transactions work, so be warned. If you can't follow, feel free to ask any questions in the chat below or on the YouTube comment section. Okay, so what's the main difference between Google Wallet and Apple Pay? Its implementation is relatively similar in that they're both NFC payment options, one for the Android operating system and one for the iOS operating system. The Android version is using host card emulation, meaning your credit card information is stored online just like it would in a retailer, and the card is charged through kind of a forwarding account that Google has set up with another bank. They basically issue a fake card number. It's always a debit card, meaning you could actually put a credit card in Google Wallet and run it as debit and even get cash back and use a credit card at any location if you wanted to. Use Discover, Amex, Visa, MasterCard at, Costco if they were to accept contactless, for example, and Costco would not pay any extra because Google's paying the swipe difference. And that's because Google, they lose money on every transaction, but that's because they use this mostly for data collection, which you shouldn't be worried about because the personal data they're collecting is not really anything that people don't already know. Most retailers track your purchases anyway. So basically, let's get back on track. These host card emulation works by having your card stored online, like an online store, like you would purchase through Amazon or something along those lines. And when you make a purchase in store, that contactless card that it's emulating then tries to validate the card in the cloud, which is the one that's stored on file. And then once that card approves the amount, it quickly transfers it to Google Wallet, and Google Wallet then approves the amount locally and then quickly transfers it once again to the retailer. It all happens very quickly, though it is a little bit slower because it has to go through a bunch of extra hoops, especially if you run it as debit. But it does work at debit in more places than Apple Pay, and we'll talk about that too. Apple Pay is using a different form of security. The tokenization, by the way, we'll get into this, is a little bit different as well. But Apple Pay is using a secure element on the phone that stores a token, which is a fake credit card or debit card number, issued by the bank directly. Apple never sees any of this information. They see a very quick pass-through of encrypted data they could never even get a hold of, and that's all they see. And then that card, that fake card on your phone, has the cryptogram and has a CVV3 generator. And we'll talk about how those differentiate later in the video as well. Basically, what happens is when you make a transaction, a certain element of your card is encrypted and randomized, and then that is sent to the merchant, which is passed through the payment processor and back to the bank. When run as debit, it's using a forwarding debit, meaning you enter your PIN number with the fake card that's on the Apple, the iPhone, and that PIN is then attempted to be verified with the fake tokenized card number, which retailers that haven't set it up properly, it'll realize that, it'll hold it for a second, and then try to verify that PIN with the bank it's associated with. If it's willing to wait long enough, it can do that. That's why sometimes debit doesn't work with Apple Pay, but it will with Google Wallet, because there's a different kind of pass-through. So they're both using tokenization. Google Wallet's using MSD tokenization. Apple Pay uses a few others. And this is where it's going to get a little interesting. And that's because Google is relying on the PayPass platform, which is also consequently why Google Wallet is not working overseas, even if you have, an overseas credit card put inside, because MSD contactless is fairly old and doesn't always work overseas. They're always on most places already on EMV contactless. So that's part of the reason. Another reason, though, that's kind of nice about MSD contactless is that some retailers don't have the ability to take EMV contactless. Let's talk about the differences between EMV and MSD contactless. MSD contactless is basically having a CVV3 code or CVC3 code on a credit card. A CVV2 or a CVC2 code is your stagnant, regular number on the back of a credit card that's usually 3 digits long and does not change. You use that code with every time you make an online purchase. Though in the store, that code is never actually sent to the retailer. It's not part of the swipe data, which is why also magnetic strip is horribly insecure. But anyway, A CVV3 number changes every transaction. That's the tokenized aspect of an MSD contactless transaction, meaning that MSD number is generated a new number every transaction, and the bank verifies that with the token built into the phone. And that's also how Google Wallet's doing. It's doing the same kind of tokenization, which is why Google Wallet works at some retailers that Apple Pay doesn't. Now, Apple Pay can use MSD tokenization, though it only does that on MasterCards, not Amex, not Visa. And we'll talk about the other two in a little bit, but MasterCards and Apple Pay are very unique because they're the only kind of card currently that Apple Pay supports both EMV online, offline. By the way, an offline transaction is when you see processing in your bank rather than completed. That's offline. It just notifies your bank of the purchase amount that it could change. But anyway, MasterCard Apple Pay can do MSD online, offline, and EMV online and offline, which is the only kind of card that can do that. Amex can only do, for example, EMV online, and Visa can only do EMV online, offline, but no MSD. The other two can't do MSD at all. It still is a little bit different than Google Wallet because MSD on Google Wallet is using the true PayPass platform, whereas Apple Pay is using a little bit different. Anyway, there's not really any way to tell the difference between the two on the merchant end, but in the back end it's slightly different. So with EMV and MSD contactless, they can be used by Apple Pay. You may be wondering, why doesn't it work with all of them? Well, that has to do with the card developers. So Amex, for example, dropped MSD contactless many years ago and switched to EMV a few years ago with their contactless cards. All their contactless cards now, I believe, are EMV contactless. There may be some that are MSD contactless, but I'm like 99% sure that all of their new Amex contactless cards that they're making are all EMV contactless cards, not MSD. PayPass cards, like Citibank's debit cards, are actually still using MSD contactless, which again is why retailers like Office Max, Jack in the Box, and Home Depot, not Home Depot, we'll get to that in a minute. Jack in the Box and Office Max right now can't accept Apple Pay, but only Google Wallet and contactless cards. And where it gets a little fuzzy with Apple Pay is when it tries to differentiate the terminal between MSD and EMV. The terminal for MSD, Apple Pay will realize it when the terminal does not spit out an EMV code, which I believe is 0080 or something like that, some weird code. The phone recognizes an EMV registered code and will then send that card data to the terminal. This is only for MasterCard, by the way. If it's given the EMV code, it will send the EMV cryptogram-based tokenization. Now, EMV's cryptogram tokenization is different because the cryptogram tokenization is completely encrypting the entire card number, and that encryption itself changes every transaction versus the CVV. It's considerably more secure and allows for better offline support. But that's how EMV cryptogram was working with Apple Pay. But anyway, Apple Pay will look at the terminal and quickly decide if it's going to be using EMV or MSD with a MasterCard. That second has to make a decision specifically based on the terminal itself. This is where the terminal is going to make the decision for the phone, not the merchant, not the payment processor. This is only the terminal. So if a merchant, for example, has older terminals with really old contactless adapters, obviously won't support EMV because it's much newer. It'll support MSD. So when using a contactless MasterCard in Apple Pay or just Apple Pay MasterCard, it will detect as MSD and will send that information. The merchant will accept it. It'll go through just fine because the merchant processor, the payment processor, has no problem with contactless MSD, tokenized MSD transactions. But let's say that retailer were to upgrade their terminals to brand new terminals that have NFC still, and you go to tap your phone and suddenly it's not working. Well, that's because the terminal says, I'm using EMV contactless, and Apple goes, oh, here's the EMV cryptogram information. The terminal goes, fantastic, I'll send this off to the payment processor. The payment processor goes, huh? What's this mess? I don't understand this. Decline. Dead. That's what's going on at retailers like Office Max. For example, where it thinks there's miscommunication. The fix for this is either get the forum built into the terminal itself. Most of these terminals that are doing this are the bigger pin pads that you see in, most major retailers in the United States. Overseas, not so much, but we're talking about the big 4-inch, 5-inch, 6-inch pin pads that have these huge screens that are, display ads and stuff as you're checking out, which I like. But anyway, and there's either changing the forums built into the terminal to only tell contactless devices to use MSD, or get the payment processor to support EMV, which they're going to anyway. All of them will. So that's kind of where most retailers are sitting right now that are having trouble with Apple Pay. Like Big Lots is another example where Google Wallet works fine, American Express works fine, but Apple Pay, it's finicky because it doesn't quite understand how to mess with it. So when that happens, the merchant sends the data on, the payment processor goes, I don't understand, declines the card, and you're wondering, well, it worked before with your old terminals, that's weird, you think the newer ones would work better. Well, that means big upper management didn't do their research and realize, this isn't going to work, or they just missed it. I mean, it's kind of an obscure fact to miss. You think, bigger, newer, better. But as of this year, terminal manufacturers no longer have to include MSD contactless support because it's so old, which is why a lot of these new terminals don't, and their default is EMV contactless, which screws up with some of the payment processors. Now, there are some weird exceptions with some retailers. Let's talk about Home Depot now. Home Depot had an issue where EMV, or it couldn't accept Apple Pay contactless, but every other kind of, or it couldn't accept MasterCard Apple Pay contactless, but every other kind of contactless was fine. This is a little weird, because their terminals are telling it to send EMV contactless when possible. Always, because they're the new ISC 250s, which their payment processor supports for Visa and Amex and Discover. This means, but not MasterCard, meaning that's why Visa worked with Apple Pay, Amex with Apple Pay, but MasterCard didn't because it was always sending EMV MasterCard, or EMV contactless. And Google Wallet worked because it was using MSD only, because Google Wallet doesn't support EMV contactless, and PayPass cards and stuff like that worked, because again, that was all MSD contactless as well. Which just gave you the reason as to why MasterCard contactless Apple Pay only always declined it on Home Depot. Though it still doesn't quite solve the puzzle as to why they completely disabled it. Well, what's really happening is the terminal's sending EMV contactless information to Apple. Apple's sending the information back to the terminal. Terminal sends it on to the payment processor. The payment processor goes, I can't do MasterCard EMV contactless, decline. The upper management saw this issue and decided, hey, let's just shut down MasterCard contactless completely, put up a message that says swipe card instead until we get this fixed, which is exactly what they did. Now, Visa and Amex on the iPhone still work, and that's because, again, Visa on the iPhone only supports EMV tokenization contactless, and not MSD at all, and so does Amex. Which brings us to Jack in the Box. The Jack in the Box drive-thru has these VivoPay DTs, or VivoPay VivoTech DTs, which are outdoor weatherproof terminals, very old ones that are no longer actually PCI compliant anyway, but that's okay. I don't think anyone really uses them very often, which is a shame because they're kind of nice. I think some Wendy's have the newer model, the DTCs, which are upright and a little bit more compact. Anyway, these old terminals they have outside were installed, I believe, in early 2000, right when contactless cards were making their debut in the U.S., because Jack in the Box was an early proprietor of contactless cards. This means, because they're so old, they don't support EMV contactless at all. Meaning, if you try to tap an Apple Pay card that can't do MSD contactless and can only do EMV contactless, it's going to come back with, I don't understand what's going on. The Apple will send out the code, hey, here's your card information, here's your cryptogram, the thing's going to go, whoa, what's a cryptogram? What's this garbage? Here, I don't know what to do with this. And Apple goes, well, I can't do anything with this information, it's spat back here. Could not complete payment, that's what it displays on the screen. And that's basically all that happens. It never actually receives anything more than it gets the card information, or begins to, and goes, I can't deal with this, decline. Now, because Apple Pay MasterCard supports MSD contactless, which is all these older terminals support, tapping that, it goes, It's an MSD contactless. This doesn't have any cryptograms, so we're going to send the MSD contactless information instead, which it does. The terminal goes, oh, I can deal with this. Here you go. Bing, bong, boom, sent. Problems. No problems at all. Which is also why Google Wallet works and contactless cards at Jack in the Box. Same thing goes for Big Lots. Well, this is actually the other problem, where the terminal is new. They're using the new Verifone MX915s. Contactless is turned on. Their payment processor does not support EMV contactless. It only supports MSD contactless, meaning a MasterCard, Apple Pay at Big Lots will actually go through. They have to call in for an authorization, which is a little weird. And that's because the terminals there are configured a little weird, where they will accept MSD or EMV, and sometimes Apple will send both, or it gets a little messy there. I'm not really sure how to completely talk about that one. That one's a little odd. But what I believe is happening in this story is that it's sending EMV contactless. The payment processor can't support it, and then that's also why Google Wallet and SoftCard, when it was still around, works there fine, but not Apple Pay, because again, it's receives the terminal's code for EMV, it sends EMV, terminal goes no problem, sends it to the payment processor, and the processor goes, I can't do this. Let's take a breath here. Okay. So to recap, Apple Pay and Google Wallet are both able of using MSD contactless with MasterCard. Apple Pay with Visa can only use EMV contactless online or offline. And then Apple Pay with Amex can only use EMV contactless online. There is no MSD support with Amex, I don't believe. Which is why the terminal sends, the newer terminals send out a code asking for EMV. Apple sends EMV, terminal says it's fine, but their processor, the company behind the retailer that actually does the processing, which is a third-party company, can't deal with EMV yet, so it declines it. And then it's some other issues where the terminal only accepts MSD because they're older, and Apple Pay can only support MSD on MasterCard. That's basically the extent of what's going on. Overall, this will get fixed with time. There's nothing else we can do at this point but wait. The retailers can't really do much about it unless they were to change the whole form, which can get a little tricky because some of these newer terminals don't even support MSD contactless anyway. They just need to get their payment processors on board with EMV, which is going to happen by October anyway, so that should be fine. Overall, I hope this clears things up. I know it was probably a bit confusing. I'm sure my organization wasn't perfect. Do you have any more questions about contactless transactions and Apple Pay and Google Wallet, anything along those lines? I've done a lot of digging and research into this. Feel free to leave a comment in the YouTube comment section or in the comment section below on the forums. Overall, I hope this helps, and thanks for watching, and enjoy the rest of whatever you were doing before you clicked play.